The issue of the legacy funding gap will come up again. This is for public sector pensions.
Yep.
Your latest report is going to be put forward for Tynwald to receive. How have things changed between 2016, the last time we had a report on the options for plugging the gap, and now?
The options are the same, I think. It's just now that we've put meat on them. People might say that we've kicked this into the long grass in the past, and I'm sure politicians in the past could have done more, and they should have done more. But in 2016, it was becoming clearer that we had options, that we could do things we could do to the actual pensions. There were options that we could do in terms of taxation, and there were options that we could do in terms of borrowing. And what we've got in this report is we've got some clarity about all those options, exactly what they mean, exactly what they cost, and that's there before members now.
And a lot of them revolve around a defined contribution scheme for new members, and possibly a voluntary move into that scheme. That could leave people in a very uncertain position for their futures.
Yeah. Yes, very much so. In actual fact, what we've specified is that the default might be a defined contribution for new members, but the new members would have the ability to opt in to the existing scheme as modified over the last 6 or 7 years. That's crucial. There's no compulsion not to be able to have the new scheme. It's just an option not to be able to have the new scheme, because some young people have told us, in actual fact, they can't even afford, sadly, the contributions that they have to make into the public sector pension scheme. So at least we've explained in this report that we could move to the default position being that you don't actually have to join. But to me, it would be sensible to join, and we've done so much, and current members have done so much in the last 8 or 9 years. I think what this report shows is that the most important aspect of the scheme now is that the future is looking much better than it did a few years ago. And what this report does is explain that in the past there's a deficiency between income and expenditure, and that has to be made up somehow, and it wouldn't be right for current members to bear all of that. So this is explaining options about how we fund the legacy gap, the difference between income and expenditure that's there because of deficiencies in the past.
Aren't you potentially storing up problems for the future at the moment? They're in the process of bringing in a new Manx state pension, which should make, all being well, state pensions affordable into the future. Public sector pensions, or at least a section of the workforce, will then have a supplementary income and rely less on the state pension. Now, isn't creating a potentially voluntary system, or a system which isn't as solid for public sector workers, actually storing up more problems for the government in the future in funding old age care for people who retire?
You asked the question well there, Catherine, because what it does is it shows that there's 3 distinct problems, or each of which needs to be addressed separately, but in some senses they are connected. One is the state pension and the national insurance system, and it's not if the state pension is secure. The state pension is secure. We've got a large national insurance fund, and the state pension has been settled to a substantial extent, and it's secure. The second one is the plans that need to come out for the private sector, for those who are not in public sector schemes, and that's work in progress. And the third one is making the public sector schemes sustainable in the long term, and there's 3 parts to making the public sector pension schemes sustainable. The first one is what's called the cost envelope, working out what it costs to provide these pensions, and we've made some agreements about that. The second one is dealing with what would happen if the deal that we've currently done is not sufficient to pay for it in the future, and that's called cost sharing, and that's absolutely crucial at the moment. We need by the end of 2018 to have agreed with the trade unions and members of the scheme more generally what cost sharing would look like when it's first implemented in 2020 after the next valuation. And the third point is dealing with the pent-up issues and challenges arising from the past, and that's what all this report is about.
And you mentioned cost sharing there. I mean, cost sharing is something which was meant to be resolved by, I think it was April this year initially, when the latest round of changes to public sector pensions were debated and agreed and brought in. Cost sharing was meant to have been sorted out by now. What's the hold-up?
The large part of cost sharing was established as early as 2012 when the first regulations were agreed. We've agreed the principles at the PSPA with trade unions and employers about how cost sharing will work. We've now got to agree details, and the hold up in one sense was dealing with the legacy funding gap. We needed step by step, first of all, to sort out the future, then to sort out the past, and then to work out how we reconcile anything that changes in the future. And so I think there are 3 stages to this, and cost sharing was slightly held up with the legacy funding gap. This report in no way puts any decision off. It just says that there's those massive decisions to be made about the funding the legacy. We're going to look at that over the next 8 months, and one of the crucial things that's going along side looking at the legacy funding is settling the cost sharing, and I hope to be able to do that in the PSPA with trade union and employers by the end of this year.
And now you said there's going to be 8 months of workshops. That's a further 8 months where no actual action is going to be taken. People from the outside, the public looking in, will see the liability growing. It stands at what? It's 3.8 billion at the moment. It's estimated at. I know you will argue that it's 2.3, but it seems to be expanding all the time with no end in sight. Are you confident that you're actually going to come to some sort of conclusion that will bring that figure down? You
are right that I will argue that it's 2.3 billion because that is what actually has to be funded. 3.8 is a specification of that according to the financial reporting standard. I think you are wrong that there's no action going on at the moment, because to get to the cost sharing mechanism will take lots of action from the unions and the members and the employers. To work up these options that we've identified will take lots of action. To get awareness of the reality of where we are will take lots of action amongst members, but also amongst the wider general public. And finally, it's just not the case that necessarily the 2.3 or 3.8 billion actuarial liability will go up. The liability depends on all sorts of things that might change in the next few months, and that's work in progress. We are setting ourselves up to get ready for the next actuarial valuation in 2020. In no way is this kicking anything into the long grass. Quite the opposite. What we've done is we've mowed that long grass. We've created a lawn. We can see the moss. We can see the weeds, and now we can make sure that our public sector pensions are actually a healthy lawn in the future.
And to plug that gap, you're suggesting perhaps Treasury might consider borrowing to put more money into the fund so that it doesn't have to come out of general revenue. But ultimately, if Treasury borrows to put money into that fund, it'll have to be paid back at some point.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
If we borrow, isn't this just, robbing Peter to pay Paul?
The figures in this report show that the borrowing option costs more in the short term and in the long term, because you're paying interest rather than using your own money on which you don't have to pay interest. It does cost more to borrow. I would like to think that having made the good progress from reducing the deficit from 58 million to 45 million members, we'll continue to work with the employers, we'll get ourselves in a better situation, and that society will come to accept that the whole of Isle of Man society, the economy, everything about this place is actually better if we can work to better manage the public sector pension liability from the past and future in terms of current sustainability. There is a borrowing option there. There are taxation options there. There are legal options there. These are all explained in the report alongside the benefits of them potentially, but also the risks of them. And I do hope that those who are going to be passionate on either side of the argument take the time to read the reports from actuaries, the reports from lawyers across QCs even, and then the debate can be better informed for the next 8 months.